Okay, so let's talk about arrow functions. All right, so in the last video, we talked a little bit about template functions. Now we're going to get into arrow functions and just, to kind of review a little bit. Remember, we have a function that can be declared, and this is called a function declaration, and this is normal JavaScript ES6 syntax. Then we have function expression, which basically is a variable that holds a function. And this is more common syntax that you might see in newer JavaScript, especially with the let keyword. Before I really jump into arrow functions, though, I want to hammer points home. So actually, like when you create functions and variables in JavaScript, there's something called hoisting that goes on behind the scenes. So essentially what that means is JavaScript rewrites your code before it actually executes it, and that's called compilation, right? And you might have heard of this term before whenever you write any program code. Essentially, before it even becomes a program, it has to first get compiled down, right? This is all just English syntax, shorthand English syntax that you understand, but your computer doesn't understand it. Your computer only understands binary, and those are just electrical signals that go on and off inside your CPU, right? And your RAM is just pulling all of these, files that exist on your computer somewhere, and they're just all binary files. So before all that happens, there's a process called compilation that basically takes your code, rewrites it, and then assembles it, and then turns it into binary code that the computer can understand. So you don't have to worry about a lot of that because the code that you write is actually getting handled under the scenes by other things like Chrome's V8 engine, which is the thing that makes Node.js actually work, right? It's a specialized engine that turns your JavaScript code into simpler code that the computer can understand. And that's in itself another topic, and we'll come back to that some point, like possibly in a different video series. I might even have a meetup on that if you're really interested, as well as how all that works, including it's important to know about because the future of the web may become WebAssembly, and so it is important to really understand how the code underneath the hood also works, right? This JavaScript code is just one layer. But essentially, so the short and long here is that your code actually gets compiled and then rewritten and optimized before it gets executed by your browser or Node.js. So when you say, oh, line 5, there should be a result and equal that to some one of two, right? 1 and 2. Then what actually happens is JavaScript says, oh, you declared this with the var keyword, so I'm going to pull result up to the top and make that an important variable. And it's going to set it to undefined first. So result is actually available through the program way even before I get to line 6 when it finally gets executed. That means I can actually console log the result before I actually set the sum. So we can do that right now. So I'm going to do node functions.js. And that gives me back undefined and 12, right? So basically that's from here and from here. 12 is coming from this multiply function. But why is it returning me undefined? Well, because it's set to undefined. If I take this off too, and we just rerun this one more time, I'll still get undefined. So you know that JavaScript under the hood is rearranging my code and essentially calling this undefined. I can take this off if you don't believe me. I'll actually bring this back down to line 6, and I can call result before it actually was created, and essentially you'll still see that result is undefined. So that's why the undefined actually appears. So it's the same with functions as well. Functions, if I put a function down below here, well, JavaScript will say you wrote this out with function syntax, right? Declaration syntax. So I'm going to rewrite your code, and I'm going to pull it to the top of the code. So basically, if you call sum anywhere, even before you've defined the function, so actually I'm going to bring it back down. Even before you've defined the function, I can still call this on line 4 because JavaScript will know, oh, this is important, so I'm going to bring it up. So let's do that real quick just to see. And I'm going to bring console log result down to line 5 because I want. So the thing about hoisting is you create the variable first, but only on line 4 do you set the value. See, that's the key. So result will actually get pulled here, but then the value will be set on line 4. That's why it's undefined before line 4. So let's take a look at our result now. And we should get 3 and 12. And this might be kind of odd to you because it's like, well, you know, the code that I write, I want it to flow in the order that I wrote it in. Why is it, you know, doing this hoisting stuff? That doesn't make sense. And you're correct. You do want it to flow in the way that you wrote it as opposed to JavaScript just mindlessly, like sort of, it's not mindless, but like just, you know, it feels like that, right? Like it just suddenly like taking control of your code and like changing the way it's supposed to work. Right? And for a long time, this confused a lot of people, especially ES5 people who may have come from other programming backgrounds like Java or C++, where everything's a lot stricter. So that's my point with this video too, is that things are a little bit more strict with ES6, right? That's been overall the big theme. So coming over to multiply, right? If I made this, let's just say var, right? Var multiply is equal to a function. Notice this is not a function expression. I want you to stop the video here and just think, what would happen if I called multiply before I set the function? Okay, so good. If you pause the video and you thought about it, what would you expect the result of this to be? So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to say multiply. And I'm going to run this one more time. And you'll notice that I still get 3 for line 5, and then I get undefined for multiply 6. So this basically just does exactly what I told you. It brings multiply to the top and then sets it to undefined, and before line 7 essentially multiply is undefined. So if I want this to work, I need to bring this down and then save it and then run it, and you'll see that I get back function multiply, right? So multiply is equal to a function, and then if I actually want to call the function, I need to like pass it some values. So there we go. Node function, and then I get 1 times 2 is 2. So I hope that made sense to you. Hoisting is a really key concept in JavaScript. Finally, let's take a look at what happens if you use let. There's a little bit of a confusion with this, right? So if I create a variable with the type let instead of var, and then I call multiply, am I going to get undefined? Stop and think if you're not sure. Press pause. Okay, I'm going to hit enter now. And you'll see this time I get an error. Instead of using var, I get an error with the let keyword because let is a little bit more safe than var. There is no hoisting. When I create a let variable, it only gets declared and instantiated at this line. Because if you try to access it before it has been created, there is nothing here. There's no hoisting. So it is preferred to write your variables and functions with the let keyword as opposed to the var. Remember, var is loose. It's not strict. When you want to be strict about how your program works, you want to use a let keyword. That's why I've been saying all along, use the let keyword as opposed to the var keyword. Okay, so if I want this to work, if I want this entire function to work, I have to now do it after the function has been defined. So here, if I run this again, you'll see I get the function statement. And then if I run the function call, that gives me 1 times 2. So that should help you understand the difference between var and let, and then, you know, function declarations as well as function expressions. Function declarations can be written anywhere, which you might think is a cool thing, and you can be a bit looser with your code. But when you want your code to actually work in a strict way, it makes more sense to use expressions and the let keyword in combination. So that way you know you can only use the function that you've created after you've defined it, not before you defined it. You know, that's just weird and confusing. Okay, I hope this video was cool and useful. In the next video, we'll start exploring arrow functions that build upon this let syntax.